The air in Saint Augustine was a wet, suffocating blanket, heavy with the scent of salt marsh and impending conflict. It was 1740, and the scent of war hung thicker than the fog rolling off the Matanzas River. For 22 years, Mateo de Rojas had walked the fine line of his life as a mestizo in Spanish Florida, a line he meticulously drew every day on the official maps of the province. He was the royal cartographer's apprentice, his hands skilled in rendering the exact stratified world that the Spanish crown demanded. The maps were neat, their borders certain. Spanish territory marked in crimson, the encroaching English claim in a hostile blue. But Mateo knew the land was never as simple as the paper suggested. He sat in the stifling quiet of the governor's residence, the afternoon sun bleaching the ink on his latest draft. Governor Montiano needed this map to show the strength of Spain's defenses, particularly the approach to the Castillo de San Marcos. He had drawn it perfectly. The thick coquina walls, the exact placement of the cannons, the clear, defensible barrier of the wilderness. But a tremor ran through his fingers whenever he held the pen over the Pueblo de Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mos, Fort Mos. This was the sanctuary of former slaves, built by Spain as a defense against the English and a beacon of freedom for those who dared escape the Carolinas. It was an anomaly, a crack in the crown's rigid structure, a line on the map that represented a dangerous new kind of life. "Your lines are too precise, Mateo," a voice broke the silence. It was Don Fernando, the royal cartographer. He adjusted his spectacles, the gold rim catching the dim light. "War does not respect geometry. The English general Oglethorpe is already marching from Georgia. He wants our city, Mateo. He wants to wipe this Spanish light from the North American map." "I have marked every viable approach, senor," Mateo said, his voice flat. "And what of the human element, the loyalty of those in Mos? The loyalty of you, Mateo." Don Fernando's gaze was sharp, resting momentarily on his darker skin, a visible testament to his native Timucua mother. "In this struggle, one is either Spanish or one is an enemy." Mateo bowed, his stomach clenching. He was Spanish, loyal and secure. He had a position, a name, and a future. He had everything to lose. That night, the distant muffled sound of a British war drum beat a pulse against the city's walls. Mateo could not sleep. He slipped out, needing the cool, dark air of the streets. He was near the northern walls, close to the dense palmetto scrub, when he heard the frantic whispering. He froze, melting into the shadows of a Spanish watchtower. They said the fort offered safe haven. Is that the truth?" The voice was raw whisper, barely audible, laced with a fear that transcended language. "It is true," another rougher voice confirmed. "Go north, but stay close to the marsh. Ask for the grito de libertad, the cry of freedom. They will take you to Mos." A moment later, a figure stumbled out of the darkness and collided with Mateo. She was small, cloaked in rags, her face smeared with mud and exhaustion. She was a woman, no older than him, and clearly a recent runaway from the English plantations. Her eyes wide with terror locked onto his. She saw his fine linen shirt, the quality leather of his boots, and the Spanish symbol embossed on his satchel. Her fear escalated into a paralyzing panic. "Please, senor," she gasped, collapsing back. Mateo instinctively reached out, not to restrain her, but to steady her. "Quiet. The sentries are near." He spoke in English, a skill he had secretly honed by studying captured English maps. "Are you hurt?" She stared, momentarily confused by his smooth English. "Who are you?" Mateo, I draw the lines they use to keep us all in place. What is your name? Asha, she whispered. I need Fort Mos. They told me the Spanish governor offers sanctuary. He does, Mateo admitted, but the city gates are closed. Oglethorpe's troops are closing in. If you are caught outside the walls, they will take you. If you are caught inside, he left the implication hanging. She would be identified as a runaway from the English enemy. Asha pushed herself upright, a flicker of fierce determination replacing the fear in her eyes. I walked 300 miles. I will not be turned back now. Mateo looked from her resolute face to the dark, fortified silhouette of the Castillo. He saw his secure world, the certain future, the comfortable life, and he saw the vast, terrifying, uncharted wilderness of a life Asha was reaching for. His loyalty to the crown felt suddenly thin, as fragile as a stretched thread. He remembered the blank space on his map, the area north of the city he had marked uncertain terrain. The main path is impossible, Mateo murmured, but there is a creek, a tidal cut that runs behind the mission houses, known only to the local fishers. It avoids the English patrol routes. Asha's breath hitched. You know the way? Mateo felt the invisible lines of his own identity. Spaniard, mestizo, cartographer, subject, snap. He was looking at a living embodiment of the grito de libertad. Her freedom was the only truth more certain than the geometry of his maps. I know the land better than the men who claim it, Mateo said, pushing his hand into the small of her back, urging her toward the shadows. Stay low, no sound. They moved like ghosts, the mud sucking at their feet. Mateo guided her through overgrown hedges and across stagnant pools. He was no longer drawing lines on vellum. He was tracing a path of pure survival, a path that led directly into the heart of the coming storm. As they reached the northernmost edge of the marsh, the point where the creek snaked toward Mos, the sound of British cannon fire finally reached them, a deep, earth-shaking boom. The siege of Saint Augustine had begun. Go now, Mateo urged, pointing to the dark water. Follow the creek. When you reach the small fort, tell the captain Francisco Menendez that the cartographer who values his freedom over his lines sent you. Asha grasped his arm, her touch brief but firm. Thank you, Mateo. May your lines always lead you toward the light. She slipped into the water, vanishing into the darkness toward Mos. Mateo watched her go, standing now between the crumbling walls of the Spanish city and the terrifying, beckoning expanse of the American wilderness. The secured world was gone. The map in his head was now a blank page. He had chosen. He was no longer charting the king's territory, but the true, brutal, untold frontier of freedom. The cannon roared again, closer this time, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Mateo turned his back on the war-torn city and walked not toward the familiar safety of the governor's residence, but north toward the dangerous, uncertain, newly drawn line of Fort Mos. The foundation of a new identity had been forged.
The air in the ballroom of the governor's palace in Saint Augustine, 1757, was thick with perfume, powdered wigs, and a tension that no amount of Spanish music could entirely dispel. The city was officially Spanish, its flag still fluttering proudly over the Castillo de San Marcos, but every courtly bow and every raised glass was observed by the lengthening shadow of English ambition. Isabella de la Vega moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a young woman born to a family whose loyalty to the Spanish crown was as old as the city itself. Her gown was silk, her smile polite, but her heart was a whirlwind of disquiet. Her world had fractured 3 days prior, not on the battlefield, but in the damp, dusty confines of her family's private archives. She hadn't been searching for secrets, only for a land deed, but she found instead a small leather-bound journal hidden behind a loose stone in the hearth. It belonged to her great-grandfather, Admiral Luis de la Vega, a celebrated figure in the previous century's colonial defense. The journal was written in a complex cipher, but Isabella, an avid scholar of ancient languages, recognized the structure, a coded key based on an obscure Latin prayer. When she cracked the first entry, the truth hit her with the force of a cannonball. Luis de la Vega had been corresponding with agents not of Madrid, but of Boston. He was not a defender of the crown. He was a spy for the burgeoning spirit of American independence, a man who believed a future lay in a new republic, not a fading empire. "You look like a woman who has just seen a ghost, señorita." The voice was low, melodic, and distinctly non-Spanish, though the accent was carefully neutralized. Isabella turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was leaning against a carved column, his formal wear immaculate, his eyes the color of the Atlantic fog, gray, deep, and utterly unreadable. This was Captain Elias Thorne, a merchant captain, officially based in Charleston, permitted in the city only to negotiate the delicate trade of indigo and rum. Unofficially, he was a creature of rumor, a smuggler, a privateer, and a known correspondent with figures in the rebellious northern colonies. "Perhaps I have, Captain," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The ghosts of our past are often the most insistent." Thorne offered a slight, charming smile. "Insistent, yes, but seldom silent. I find secrets often demand to be heard, especially when the light of the present is too harsh." He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from courtly flirtation to something intensely focused. "I heard your family was restoring the old archive room. Did you find anything illuminating among the dust?" The sheer audacity of his question sent a cold shock through Isabella. How could he possibly know? "Only faded deeds, Captain. Our family's loyalty is well documented." "Loyalty is a noble virtue," Thorne murmured, taking her gloved hand in a swift, practiced movement and raising it to his lips. "But sometimes a far more compelling virtue is necessity." He released her hand, leaving behind a slip of tightly folded vellum. Before Isabella could react, he was gone, weaving seamlessly through the crowd toward the governor. Retreating to a quiet alcove, Isabella unfolded the vellum. It contained only 3 words, written in the same neat script as the journal's cipher key. The Admiral's cipher. The coincidence was too precise to be chance. Elias Thorne was not just a merchant. He was either an agent who knew of her great-grandfather's activities, or more dangerously, someone looking to exploit the discovery. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Isabella arranged a clandestine meeting the following evening in the gardens of the Mission of Nombre de Dios, an ancient, secluded spot outside the city walls. When Thorne arrived, he was without his formal coat, looking less like a captain and more like a man accustomed to navigating danger in darkness. "You came," he stated. His voice was a confirmation, not a question. "You threatened my family's honor," Isabella countered. "My great-grandfather was a hero of Spain." "He was a pragmatist," Thorne corrected softly. "He saw the future. He saw that Spanish power was a rotting husk, and that the promise of the American idea, a land governed by its people, was inevitable." He was preparing for that moment. He then revealed his own secret. "I am not here for Indigo, Isabella. I represent a consortium of influential figures in the Carolinas and Virginia, men who believe that when the inevitable war with England comes, the Spanish territories must be ready to pivot. Your ancestors' documents contain maps of the inner defenses of San Marcos, and more importantly, a detailed list of loyalists and those who might be swayed to the new cause. And you expect me to hand over the proof of my family's betrayal? I expect you to look past loyalty and see freedom," Thorne challenged, stepping close enough for the scent of sea salt and tobacco to reach her. "Spain has held this city for 200 years, but can it hold your future? Can it give you the voice that the New World offers?" The raw conviction in his voice, coupled with the immediate visceral connection she felt to him, ignited a spark of rebellion within her. She was bound by tradition, but drawn to the uncharted freedom he represented. The forbidden nature of their meeting, the shared secret, was intoxicating. "The journal is locked in a wall safe," Isabella admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But the key is a necklace my grandmother always wore. It is never out of her sight." Thorne did not press her for the location. He simply nodded, his eyes capturing the deep turmoil in hers. "Then we must create a distraction, a grand one. Something that pulls every Spanish eye away from your grandmother's parlor. Something that threatens the very foundation of the governor's control." Over the next few days, their secret meetings turned into whispered blueprints. In the daytime, they exchanged polite smiles in public. At night, they plotted treason. Isabella, using her position and social access, gathered minor details about the governor's schedule, troop rotations, and the precise moment when the governor's grand annual ball would reach its peak of revelry. The night of the ball, the palace was a dizzying spectacle of opulence. As the musicians reached a soaring crescendo, Isabella stood with Thorne by a window overlooking the harbor. He had just finished explaining the mechanism of a small smoke-producing signal rocket. "When the rocket fires from my ship in the bay, every sentry will focus on the threat of a naval assault. That will be our 10-minute window." Isabella felt a terrifying sense of exhilaration. She was not dancing, she was participating in the genesis of a nation. And my grandmother? She will be preoccupied with the panic. A quick hand, a skilled movement, the necklace will be yours. He turned, his gaze intense. "And then, Isabella, you choose. Spain's past, or a new future with me across the Atlantic." She looked at him, recognizing that the battle for control was indeed being fought in whispered promises. Her heart chose the captain, her mind grasped the truth of her ancestors' cause. "The Admiral's Cipher belongs to the New World," she declared, her eyes shining with determination. "But tonight, Captain, you and I belong only to this secret." As their lips met in a brief, burning kiss hidden by the shadows of the palatial curtain, the sound of the signal rocket ripped through the night. A streak of crimson shot into the sky over the bay. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. While Spanish officials rushed to the ramparts, Isabella de la Vega slipped away, her silk gown rustling softly as she went to claim her grandmother's necklace and her destiny.